What I think is so interesting is that whether you are a stay-at-home breastfeeding mom wanting more hydration in order to nourish your baby, or whether you're a professional athlete, the protocol is actually the same. And that's what I'm hoping to share with you today. My name is Jess Mouneimne. I am a professional fighter. I'm also a performance coach and the founder of Primal Wellness. We're going to get jumped into why hydration and why sodium in particular is so critical or not. Let's see how we go. One of the things is that a lot of people think that being optimally hydrated is really just about drinking more water. But ultimately, electrolytes are the foundation of what drives hydration. Over the last 6 to 8 years, I've done a plethora of research into hydration as a professional athlete, really seeing myself more as a cerebral athlete and wanting to find ways to up level my performance in the athletic space. I kind of went deep into various research. And one of the experts that came up for me very early on in that research was Dr. James Antonio. He's a cardiovascular researcher and he's authored a couple of books. One that most people know about is called The Salt Fix. But the one that really shaped how I perceive performance is called Win. And if any of you are big on reading, I really highly recommend the works of Dr. James Antonio, specifically the book Win. It covers hydration as a chapter, but it also goes into other nutrients that you need, other vitamins that you need, other protocols and hacks that you can use to optimize performance from a physical perspective. I see there's a question coming through. I will get to it. And please, if anybody is wanting to ask questions, please pop them down and I will answer them. And so in the work that he speaks about this balance between sodium, potassium, magnesium, and specifically sodium and how crucial sodium is to drive hydration into your cells and to ultimately make sure that you are performing at an optimal level, both cognitively and physically. And so water alone doesn't hydrate us. Your body needs those electrolytes, like I mentioned, sodium specifically, to move that water into your cells and generate an electrical energy, which then activates your nerves and your muscles. And so one of the most interesting things that he speaks about is how as little as a 1 to 2% of a drop in blood volume, in other words, dehydration, how that can impact things like your endurance, your power, and your focus. So that's just a 20% drop in your hydration. Through a 20% drop in your hydration, a 20% drop in your performance through a 1 to 2% drop in hydration, you are ultimately impacting your performance and your output by 1/5 just by being mildly dehydrated or just because your electrolyte balance is slightly off. And a lot of the time, you won't realize that that balance is off because you feel like you're drinking enough water, but you're drinking plain water. So when we talk about hydration, most people will focus or hone in on muscles because ultimately you are needing to exercise, pump blood to your muscles in order to exercise. And so there they can kind of put two and two together and understand why it's important to have an elevated blood plasma or be hydrated in order to exercise, especially because there'll be sweating involved and you'll be losing hydration. But we don't speak about the brain enough. And I did mention this in my promo if anybody saw it, but your brain literally floats in a cushion of fluid, which is called cerebrospinal fluid. And this fluid protects the brain from a lot of things, but one of them is from hitting the inside of your skull. And so it's essentially your brain's or your body's natural shock absorber for your brain. So what's wild is that when you're dehydrated, the volume of that protective fluid drops. And that means that your brain has less cushion and then it can't protect itself against impact. So because low hydration status increases your brain vulnerability during head impact, combat sport athletes, any contact athletes, rugby players, footballers, and even cyclists or runners who are at risk of a fall, if they are dehydrated and have a fall, they can suffer a concussion in a much more severe way. So essentially, a well-hydrated brain is suspended, it's protected, it's resilient. A dehydrated brain, there's more slush and things are moving around a little bit more, so it's less protected. And so one of the things that's quite interesting for those that are in the combat sports space, sometimes you'll see a fighter who struggles to make weight and They arrive on the scale, if you're watching like UFC weigh-ins, for example, they arrive on the scale and they are shaky and dizzy and quite weak and need to be held up. And very often you see that same fighter who then gets knocked out quite early on in like round one or round two from a punch that doesn't look like it maybe should have knocked them out. And obviously we're not always back in to know what's happening behind the scenes, but you do wonder what was that fighter's, how much weight did they cut? What was their rehydration protocol? And maybe at UFC level, they've kind of got that down, but certainly at a local professional level, or definitely at an amateur level, a lot of people just don't have the right information about this and aren't rehydrating properly after cutting weight. So that's just speaking about contact sports specifically. I mean, you can think about rugby players playing on a hot day and there's an impact from two players colliding, and the injury and the concussion is so much more severe, often just because of a lack of hydration. But it isn't just for fighters. It's anyone who might be at a risk of a fall, whether it's the elderly, whether it's a child playing on the playground, whether it's a weekend warrior exercising and doesn't have this under control. So the benefits of maintaining proper hydration literally buffer your brain. So when we say hydration fuels performance, we also mean that hydration protects the organs that run the show, ultimately your brain. So I want to talk about the big one quickly, which is sodium. And sodium is essentially the one main energy currency that is responsible for powering your brain. It regulates your fluid balance, muscle contraction, nerve impulses, and even your hormone function. So this is the part where everybody gets stressed out because people are afraid of salt. So the average adult needs 3 to 6 grams of sodium per day. That's about 1.5 to 3 teaspoons of salt, or 3,000 to 6,000 milligrams to function optimally. See, there's a question about did we start? So I'm wondering if everybody can see me. Just let me know in the chat box if those that are here can actually see what's happening, because we did have a question from somebody. Okay, fab. Okay, so maybe it's just a problem with one person. All right, so I'm going to continue. So when we talk about sodium, and sodium is one of the things that gets a really kind of bad rap in mainstream media, particularly as we get older, particularly as we start to worry about things like high blood pressure. And so I find that people are, as a result, quite afraid of sodium. So your body, like I said, needs between 3,000 and 6,000 milligrams of sodium a day. So that's about 1.5 to 3 teaspoons of salt, essentially, high quality salt, for your body to function optimally. And athletes or anyone who sweats heavily or lives in a hot climate, they might even need more than that. And for decades, salt has been painted as the villain. It's been blamed for high blood pressure, for heart attacks, for water retention. But this belief can come from some kind of flawed, outdated science, and often is oversimplified. Now, I want to just put a disclaimer in here and say that I'm not in any way going to counter anything that your doctor might be saying. This is for you to take up with them and to do your own research and decide what's better for you. I'm not a doctor, but from the research that's out there, developing research by doctors, this is what is coming out now. And what they're saying is that a lot of this research came out kind of in the 1970s, where researchers noticed that some people with hypertension happen to be eating more salt. And they jumped to the conclusion that it was the salt that caused it. This also happened to follow a time when there was the infiltration of highly ultra-processed foods, fast food chains popping up everywhere, a lot of food with a lot of preservatives, convenience food, microwave meals, these kind of things. So these foods weren't just high in low-grade table salt, but they were also high in seed oils, chemicals, dyes, fillers. So that was the old research. And as a result, what's been kind of put out since then has been, if you have high blood pressure, you need to stay away from salt. If you want to avoid having high blood pressure in 30 years, stay away from salt. But we haven't often looked at things like insulin resistance or what the other elements of your diet are that you're eating that could be contributing. So again, going back to Dr. James Antonio, who is a cardiovascular research scientist, and he's the author of The Salt Fix and the book Win. He says that when you restrict salt too much, your body activates survival hormones. Those are renin, angiotensin 2, and aldosterone. And these hormones are essentially meant to retain salt. But they also do something interesting. They constrict your blood vessels and therefore they raise your blood pressure. So ironically, cutting salt out over a long period of time can actually increase your blood pressure and worsen your blood pressure issues over time because it forces your body into this chronic state of stress. So salt has been demonized because we've confused correlation with causation and ignored the fact that blood pressure is driven by other elements like insulin resistance, stress hormones, mineral imbalances, not just sodium itself. So sometimes it could be a general electrolyte imbalance, like I see somebody's mentioning magnesium. It could be magnesium, it could be potassium, that you're getting too much of or too little, but we tend to just stay away from the salt. I'm going to get to the questions, but please keep asking them. So studies have actually shown that people who eat adequate salt and cut out processed sugars, their blood pressure can often improve. So the key takeaways in this section that I just want to go through again, if you are taking notes, is that your body actually needs between 3,000 and 6,000 milligrams of sodium daily just to maintain blood volume, your nerve function, and your muscle performance. The real danger isn't moderate high quality salt, it's actually low salt and high sugar coupled with a dehydrated lifestyle that can put your cardiovascular system under chronic stress. All right, so I want to chat a little bit about sodium blood pressure and the brain and why low energy can often be related to low salt intake. So electrolyte depletion, it can impair your memory, your concentration, and your mood in the same way that your blood sugar can. So very often people will feel unfocused mid-morning, maybe headachy in the afternoon, or mentally foggy after a workout. And it's not just fatigue. It can often be a cause or a result, rather, of an electrolyte imbalance. And one of the most common things that I see in athletes that I coach is that even actually in people that are trained recreationally, is that halfway through a session, they can feel dizzy, shaky, and weak. And they can assume that maybe they're having a low blood sugar issue. So maybe it'll be that they haven't eaten that day, or they'll reach for something sugary, thinking that they need that to increase their energy or to shift their blood sugar. But often what they actually need is salt. So here's what's actually happening physiologically. When you are dehydrated or sodium depleted, your blood volume drops. And when your blood volume drops, your blood pressure lowers, which means that there's less oxygen, less glucose delivery to your brain and to your muscles. And that's why you're feeling lightheaded, foggy, or suddenly feel quite flat in training. Not because your blood sugar crashed, but because your body just doesn't have enough sodium to keep your blood pressure and your fluid balance stable. So a drop in sodium can mimic hypoglycemia, fatigue, weakness, shakiness. But like I said, the fix isn't necessarily sugar or even carbs. It's restoring that electrolyte balance. And so when you add sodium back, your blood volume and your circulation will then normalize almost immediately. And that feeling of dizziness will actually start to disappear. And there's a powerful example of this. It's called the pickle juice study. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It was published in the Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise in 2010. So researchers induced muscle cramps in dehydrated athletes. They had them drink pickle juice after they induced those cramps. And it was, just to give you the ratio, it was 1 milliliter per kg of body weight of pickle juice that they were made to drink. So pickle juice is gross. I don't recommend anybody drinks it. It is highly effective if you are having a stubborn cramp. You don't need too much of it, but it's just essentially a highly concentrated salt liquid, right? Within 85 seconds of these athletes drinking this pickle juice, their cramps resolved completely. And if you look at that, 85 seconds is far too quick for the sodium to even reach the bloodstream. So what they're saying happened is that the sodium receptors in the mouth and the throat were triggered by the neural reflexes that relax the muscle and restore balance almost instantly. And so even before the sodium was able to reach the bloodstream, the muscle started to relax. So sodium doesn't just restore hydration, it also communicates with your nerve system in actual real time. And that's why many endurance athletes now use electrolyte shots or salts mid-workout instead of sugary gels. They're stabilizing the internal power grid, not spiking and depleting their blood sugar levels. Okay, I know I'm giving you a lot here. Hydration focus, and brain function. So here is where hydration really impacts your mental edge from an electrolyte perspective. We often think of hydration as purely physical, about muscles, about cramps, about how much sweat you are letting go of, and therefore how much you need to put back in. But your brain is one of the most, it is basically made up of water, right? An electrolyte, and it's therefore it's electrolyte sensitive. It is an electrolyte sensitive organ, rather. So it's 75% water, and it relies on a delicate electrical balance to send messages, form memories, and to keep you focused. So when hydration or sodium levels drop, the electrical gradients that neurons use to fire starts to weaken. So in simple terms, your brain's Wi-Fi signal starts to get fuzzy when your electrolytes are out. And that's when you feel foggy or you feel unfocused. And you have things like slower reaction times, forgetfulness. Mentally, you feel quite flat, maybe easily distracted or unmotivated. It's not always fatigue or stress. Often it is just an electrolyte imbalance. So again, going back to James Antonio, he says a dehydrated brain literally shrinks in volume, which is what impairs communication between your neurons. Restoring hydration and sodium can bring the brain back online within a few minutes. So let's chat about what's happening biologically. When you're low on sodium, your neurons can't maintain their charge. So this slows the transmission of your nerve impulses, the same process that powers focus and your reflexes ultimately. So your brain's energy production also drops because your electrolytes help move glucose and oxygen into your brain cells. And when your blood volume does start to decrease from dehydration or sodium loss, less oxygenated blood is reaching the brain, meaning less energy and more mental fatigue. I'm going to give you one more thing about the brain. In 2018, a study was published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, and it found that, I mentioned this, just a 1 to 2% dehydration percentage impacts your cognitive performance by up to 25%. So I mentioned this stat earlier, and we said about a 20% decline in physical performance, and then we're looking at about a 25% decline in cognitive performance. So this means that if you're an athlete, if you're a student or a busy professional, you're losing as little as, if you've lost as little as half a liter of fluid, that can seriously impact your decision making, your reaction time, your ability to recall memory. Maybe I should have been more hydrated before this, right? So even short-term dehydration can in fact impact your hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that's responsible for memory and for learning. So one of the biggest hacks that I've given to kids who are writing exams is to make sure that they're adequately hydrated with the right electrolyte balance, because it helps you both study and then recall that memory when you are writing exams. But generally, the kind of old school hack for kids is to send them to exams, especially long papers, with candy, because we want to keep their blood sugar up. But actually finding that if you can keep their electrolytes balanced, you're going to see that they're able to really recall their memory in a much more impactful way. All right, I just want to see where we are with this. So yeah, when you're dehydrated, you struggle to concentrate, you struggle to, recall important facts. Your neurons are literally running on a low voltage. But what's fascinating is how quickly this can be reversed when sodium and hydration are restored. Both focus, memory, and reaction time can rebound within minutes. And so that's why something called pre-hydration and electrolyte intake before training or work is optimal. It's essentially mental preparation. So hydration is not just fueling your body, it's sharpening your mind. So if you take anything away, it's those two things, that we're not just talking about muscles here, but we're also talking about the cognitive benefits. Okay, let me just have a sip of hydration, excuse me. And so I want to take a minute just to speak about pre-hydration, because it's something that is such a big hack from a performance perspective, but it's something that is hugely, I think, underrated or maybe not thought about. So often, let's talk about exercise. You show up to your training session, most busy professionals and even professional athletes are showing up to a training session distracted, busy. They're taking time away from their day job to get that training session in. They probably had too much caffeine that day, haven't drunk enough water, but they show up with their bottle of water to their training session. And once they start to exercise, once they start to break a sweat, they start drinking. Maybe they have electrolytes in their bottle of water, but the problem is that they're starting to add those electrolytes in maybe 20 minutes into their training session. And so your body has to play catch up. So let's take it away from the training session and talk a little bit about a general day going to work or going to university. You wake up, you've essentially been fasting all night while you've been sleeping. Your body is already dehydrated. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute a minute again also. But your body is already dehydrated because you've been sleeping all night. Most people don't have a glass of water before they wake up, let alone electrolytes. Most people are reaching for a cup of coffee first thing. So you are further dehydrating yourself and then going about your day, waking up hydrated, further dehydrating yourself. And then you wonder why you're feeling quite crappy by 10 or 11 o'clock. So pre-hydration is all about starting your day or starting your training session right. Before we talk about supplements or caffeine or motivation, we really do need to focus on this pre-hydration thing, because the truth is that most people start their day or their training already dehydrated. You lose between 500 mils to a liter of water overnight through breathing, sweating, and getting up and urinating. Like I said, that means that you wake up pretty dehydrated. And anybody that's cut weight or is on a weight loss journey will know that you wake up in the morning lighter than you did than you were the night before. And you think, oh, I lost weight in the night. Like, no, you just dehydrated. Your blood volume is ultimately considerably lower, and therefore your sodium concentration is diluted and your cells are literally operating on half power. So before you sip your first cup of coffee or your first set at the gym, your body is already behind. And here again, if you're starting exercise, even 1% dehydrated, is going to lead to an earlier rise in your heart rate, reduced endurance, and increase in the perception of fatigue. So pre-hydration can offset that completely. I've always said this, pre-hydration is the best pre-workout that anybody can take. When you pre-hydrate, you're doing what no caffeine-based pre-workout can do. You're restoring blood volume so that your oxygen and your nutrients can actually reach your muscles more efficiently, something that a pre-workout with lots of caffeine actually can't do. You're stabilizing your blood pressure so you don't get dizzy mid-set. You're not crashing halfway through your session. You're balancing your electrolytes so your muscle contractions can be more powerful, more smooth, and you'll feel more coordinated when you're training. You're also fueling your brain. Sodium, potassium, and magnesium can enhance your neural firing and your mental drive. I know that caffeine is a crutch for most of us, myself too, and it's how we start our day. It's often what's in our pre-workouts if we're exercising. It's what we reach for, mid-afternoon. But caffeine can really mask the fatigue, but it doesn't fix the underlying cause of that low cellular hydration. In fact, caffeine can act as a mild diuretic, which can worsen your dehydration if you haven't pre-hydrated. So instead of reaching for, some kind of fluorescent caffeine-filled energy drink, try starting your day with 500 to 750 mils of water with electrolytes in it and see how that can shift things. 1 to 2 grams of sodium, which is about a quarter to a half teaspoon of salt, or a serving of an electrolyte formula like A salt, can really shift things in the right direction for you. All right, see these questions, I'm going to get to them now. Let's see what else I need to talk to you about. So in his book, Dr. James DiNicolantonio speaks about front-loading hydration, which is what I call pre-hydration. Because once you're behind on your fluids, it's very difficult to start to catch them up. I like to use the example of charging your phone before you leave the house. We charge our phones overnight. We make sure we have a fully charged battery before we leave the house, because it would be irresponsible of us to wait for our battery to die and for our phone to go offline before we start to charge it. But we do it with our bodies quite often. And it's just quite a nice analogy to think of it in that way. Similarly, if you think about exercising and how blood volume works. So when you start exercising, your body needs to pump blood to, let's say, your bicep in order for you to lift the dumbbell. So your brain is signaling to your body, send blood to the bicep. If you are drinking your electrolyte formula and putting sodium in your body only after you're feeling tired, only after you're feeling thirsty, you're now sitting with this conflicted signal in your brain where it's going, okay, do I send the blood to the bicep to lift the weight, or am I sending the blood to the stomach to digest, to get those electrolytes into the bloodstream? Again, showing up pre-hydrated or front-loading can really be a game changer where that's concerned. Okay, so quickly, I want to talk about drinking too much water. A lot of the clients that I coach either don't drink any water at all, they're living on fizzy cool drinks and caffeine, or they tell me, no, I don't have a problem, I drink plenty of water. And so it's 2 to 3 liters of plain water a day. And so here's why that can be problematic. Drinking too much water without electrolytes can actually make you less hydrated. When you overhydrate on plain water, you're actually diluting your sodium levels in your blood. This condition is called hypotremia. And even mild dilution can cause things like headaches, fatigue, nausea, muscle weakness. And in extreme cases, it can also become life-threatening. So again, talking about the fight space, because that is essentially the space that I come from. I have an extra light here that's dying. A lot of the times when athletes are cutting large amounts of weight, they do something called water loading. And water loading is drinking a large amount of water leading up to a fight. And what it does is it actually tells the body that it's drowning, and so you urinate a lot. And what you do is you start by drinking 7 liters of water in a day, which is a lot, and then you go down to 5, 3, 4, 2, and at the end you're not consuming any water anymore, but your body still thinks that it needs to get rid of fluids, and so you keep urinating. And this is how athletes dehydrate themselves to make weight. It's pretty brutal. It's pretty archaic. I don't recommend anybody doing it like that, because what you're doing is you're flushing your body of every last little bit of electrolyte that there is inside. And it will just be completely impossible for you to make up any of those electrolytes in 24 hours before arriving at a competition. And so that's where these things can become quite life-threatening. This light has died completely, so I hope you guys can still see me okay. So Dr. James Mouneimne actually says that a lot of athletes and health-conscious people are suffering from a sense of internal drowning because their water intake exceeds their electrolyte balance. And that's where the problem can come in. So you can drink 3 liters of water a day and still be bloated, you can still be tired, you can still be lightheaded, because your body literally can't move the water in your cells without the sodium. So you're putting the water in and it's going straight out. It can't actually get intracellularly because it doesn't have sodium to do that. So instead of focusing on more water, we should actually be focusing on balancing our hydration with sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And that's really what makes the difference between just being weight and being hydrated. Okay, so I want to spend a few minutes just talking about competitions. So things like race days, obviously there's the marathon coming up, things like fights, that kind of thing, and how to go about structuring a high performance day. So when it comes to big events, these can be fights, races, any high stake competition, high rocks. Hydration as a strategy can really be a massive breakthrough for your performance. I always recommend to athletes to look at 24 hours before your competition. So starting to slowly increase both your water and your electrolytes from about an extra 1 to 2 servings, whether that is your A salt or whether it's another hydration formula or just upping your salt intake. You want to be aiming for 4 to 6 grams of sodium daily, and maybe even increasing that if you're in a hot climate. Then you want to be putting that together with about 500 to 750 mils of water at each time. Then on race day, you want to be front loading your hydration like we mentioned. So again, 500 mils to 750 mils of water with an electrolyte on waking. And then you can again repeat that about 60 to 90 minutes before you start. This will ensure that your blood plasma is optimized, that your muscles, your brain, your heart are fully oxygenated before that adrenaline spike hits, which is ultimately going to happen in a competition. During your competition, if it is a competition that is over 60 minutes or it's high intensity, I would say sip on electrolytes every 15 to 20 minutes during the competition too. If you are waiting for thirst, you're going to fall behind, because once that thirst hits, it's a sign that you are already pretty dehydrated. And then obviously after your competition, you want to recover what you've lost through the session. Similarly, for anybody that is using a sauna protocol not for weight cutting, but for longevity, be aware of how much you sweat in a sauna. A nice way to do that is to weigh yourself before and after the sauna, not to see how much weight you've lost, but to see how much fluid you've lost, to make sure that you're putting that same amount in. So again, you're looking at about 1,000 milligrams of sodium per 750 mils of fluid that's been lost. If you're losing a kg in a 40-minute sauna session, you want to be doing about a liter of water with about 1,200 milligrams of sodium. Obviously, because I created A Salt, I believe that it's got the perfect balance through research of uh, sodium, magnesium, potassium, and as well as glycine and essential amino acids. So we try to give you the full complex of everything you need to optimize hydration. But really, the other things that you need to look out for, whether it's through A Salt or through another electrolyte powder, is that there are natural flavors. If there are, that it's sweetened with something natural like a stevia rather than lots of sugar. So very often, a lot of the hydration formulations that you'll find in like a disc game, for example, or a sports shop where there's a bunch of colorful things on the shelf, when you actually look at how much sodium is in there, it's like 150 milligrams, and that's just not enough. And then there'll be a high sugar content, which you really should be staying away from as much as possible. So proper hydration really depends on balance. So you want to make sure that you've got a good balance of your sodium, your magnesium, and your potassium in your electrolyte formulation. And again, like I said, the other things that are important is that it's not full of artificial dyes, of crazy amounts of sugar. You want to make sure that there's a good amount of sodium in there. And the other important thing to look at is clean bioavailable forms of sodium, like sodium citrate or chloride salts, rather than cheap carbonates. Quality really does matter more than flavor. Obviously, if you can find something that tastes relatively good, that's great too. So I want to talk about one thing that comes up a lot very quickly, and that is around people adding a pinch of salt to their water. It comes up every time I do a hydration seminar, webinar. People say, I drink Celtic salt. I put a pinch of Celtic salt in my glass of water first thing in the morning. Surely that's enough. And while the salt is a high quality salt, and while there's nothing wrong with putting it into your water, I just want to chat about how much sodium really is in a pinch of salt. So a pinch of salt is probably like 0.4 grams of salt in a pinch. And in zero point 0.4 grams of salt, there's maybe 160 milligrams of sodium. So if you need on average 3,000, 5,000 milligrams of sodium a day, you're not getting that from a pinch of salt in a glass of water. Unless you're drinking 10 glasses of water, then you may be making up your 1,000 milligrams, which is your minimum that you need. So these are just things to be aware of. We've been sold this idea that, you can just put a pinch of salt into your water and that's going to be enough. Most people aren't doing that in every glass of water, and that's why you might not be feeling the benefits. So while it can be useful from time to time to add it as a quick fix, you might not be getting enough. So just to be aware of, if you're putting 3 teaspoons of Celtic salt into a glass of water, you're going to hit your sodium quota for the day, but it's going to taste revolting. So that's where these kind of hacks of high quality electrolyte supplements come in quite handy. Other ways that you can do it, if you're not into electrolyte supplementation, is finding a high quality salt, whether it's a Celtic salt or a Kalahari desert salt, something that is pure. Please be careful when it comes to Himalayan salt. So Himalayan salt has been marketed as this very healthy option as a salt because of its pink color. People think it's quite exotic and therefore must be quite healthy. The idea of the Himalayas, a lot of the salt is actually just mined in Pakistan and it's mined via detonation. So they're blowing up salt mines. And so often that pink color is actually coming through because of the chemicals in the explosion, in the explosives, rather than some kind of amazing nutrients. So do be careful when you are finding salt that you're finding high quality salt that's unpolluted. And then generously salting your food is a very good way to make sure that you are adequately getting salt in your diet if you aren't into electrolyte supplementation.